It was around 6 a.m. when I opened the door of my isolated house in the Adirondack Mountains to breathe in the fresh forest air, heavy with the scent of pine and morning dew. My name is Aidan Brody, a former journalist and now an aspiring writer. I was not fully awake yet and simply stepped outside wearing my worn flannel shirt and scuffed boots, yawning and thinking about a strong cup of coffee that might help me wake up and begin another day of my chosen solitude in the wilderness. At that moment, I froze as if struck by an electric shock, because just a few steps away from me stood a massive black bear. Its presence seemed to fill the entire space, making the air feel thick and completely still. The animal did not move, did not growl, and showed no signs of aggression. It simply stood there on my porch, breathing heavily. Its body trembled, and its fur was tangled and wet in places, as if it had just come out of a raging river or a fierce struggle with an unknown opponent. What affected me most were the predator's eyes, dark, wet, almost human. Tears seemed to flow from them, running down its face in thin streams, like water leaking from a broken faucet. I had never seen a wild animal truly cry before. The sight went straight to my heart, making me forget the fear of this powerful creature that could crush my skull with a single blow of its paw. Only then did I notice that the bear was holding a small, lifeless body in its mouth, a cub whose limbs hung loosely and whose head had fallen to the side, showing no signs of life, like a rag doll abandoned by a careless child. In that instant, I understood that this was not a male bear, but a female, a mother with a dying cub. I wanted to slam the door shut and reach for the old rifle hanging on the kitchen wall, a natural reaction for anyone facing a wild animal at their doorstep. But something in the mother's behavior, in her silent and overwhelming maternal despair, stopped me. It made me realize that this was not a threat standing before me, but a mother on the edge of a tragedy too deep for me to even name. My heart was pounding violently against my ribs as I slowly stepped backward, never taking my eyes off the bear. To my astonishment, she took a few careful steps toward me, then very gently, with almost human tenderness, placed her cub on the wooden floor of my porch. After that, she stepped back, sat on her hind legs, and stared at me without blinking, as if waiting for something I could not yet understand. Despite every instinct of self-preservation, every story I had ever heard about bears attacking humans, ignoring all the warnings from the rangers, I dropped to my knees in front of the motionless cub. It looked so small, barely the size of an average cocker spaniel, with its ribs clearly visible and dried blood crusted on one ear. I was almost certain it was dead when its chest suddenly moved, just slightly. The movement was so faint that I might have missed it if I had not been watching so closely. I looked up at the mother bear, who continued to stare at me with a strange, almost conscious sense of expectation. The words came out before I had time to think. "I'll try. Okay, I'll try to help him." The bear did not move, as if she understood every word I said. With my heart ready to burst from my chest, I carefully wrapped the trembling cub in my flannel shirt and slowly stepped back into the house, avoiding any sudden movements and expecting a growl or an attack at any second. But the bear simply remained seated in silence, as if she knew something I did not. Once inside, I placed the cub on the couch and frantically gathered anything that might help, a towel, a heating pad, bottles of water, acting more on instinct than real knowledge. All the while, I kept glancing out the window, where the bear remained a still shadow, never taking her eyes off my house. The cub felt cold to the touch and weak, but it had not crossed the final line yet. I stood in the middle of my living room, holding this tiny, almost lifeless creature in my hands, thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do now? At that moment, I realized this was not just a strange encounter with a wild animal or a simple twist of fate. It was something more, something that had chosen me, despite every law of nature and common sense. I was not ready for this responsibility, but it seemed the bear was ready to trust me. She stayed at the edge of my property, watching the house all day while I tried to save her cub, who seemed unwilling to leave this world without a fight. The cub lay on my couch among the towels, still and cold. I knelt down and gently placed 2 fingers against its tiny ribs, trying to feel a pulse or any sign of breathing. When I felt nothing clear, I held my breath and leaned in close enough to catch the earthy forest smell of wet fur mixed with the metallic scent of blood. Then its chest rose and fell once more, weak, but real. I exhaled in relief. "You're alive, little one. You're still with us." I wrapped the cub more tightly in my shirt and hurried into the back room, where I found a space heater, which I immediately turned on to its highest setting. I spread every soft item I could find around it, blankets, towels, pillows, creating something like a warm nest for my small patient. His breathing was shallow. His chest barely moved, and one of his hind legs, on closer inspection, looked strangely stiff, as if it were broken or paralyzed. Dried blood surrounded one ear, making it clear that this was not simple exhaustion or weakness. Something serious had happened to the cub. I heard scratching outside, and when I looked through the window, I saw that the mother bear was still there. She sat like an ancient statue, patiently watching the house where her cub lay. I picked up my phone and called Rachel Kowalski, the nearest veterinarian, even though I knew she mostly worked with farm animals. "Rachel, it's Aiden. I have a bear cub in my house. He's injured and in very bad condition. His mother brought him to me and left him right on my porch. She's still outside, waiting." After a long pause filled with disbelief, Rachel finally said, "Are you sure you haven't had too much to drink, Aiden?" "No, damn it, I'm completely serious. I don't have time to explain. Tell me what to do to keep him alive." After another pause, she sighed and began giving clear instructions. "Warm him up. Check for any open bleeding. Don't give him solid food yet, only liquids. You can make a honey and water solution and give it drop by drop. I'll call Gina. She used to work at a wildlife rehabilitation center. Hold on, we'll be there soon." I hung up and went to the kitchen, where I found an old bottle of raw honey. I mixed it with warm water and, using a turkey baster, carefully opened the cub's mouth and let a few drops of the liquid inside. At first, there was no reaction. But after several attempts, his tongue moved slightly, and I felt a surge of hope. "That's it. Come on, little fighter. Stay with me." I sat beside him for what must have been more than an hour, talking to him, humming softly, sometimes muttering curses under my breath out of helplessness. All that time, the mother bear outside remained completely still. I opened the door slightly, and she lifted her head, met my eyes, and then lowered it again. That simple movement showed such unexpected trust that I still remember it clearly and wonder how a wild animal managed to overcome its fear of a human. By noon, the cub moved his paw for the first time, just a little, lazily, as if checking whether his muscles still worked. I laughed with relief, not even noticing the tears running down my cheeks. "You're not dying today, little one. I won't let you," I whispered, looking at the cub even as panic churned inside me. I knew I was just a writer with a handful of towels and a heater, trying to save a wild animal I knew almost nothing about. By the middle of the day, my living room looked like a chaotic veterinary clinic. Blankets covered every surface, towels were piled everywhere, the heater was running at full power, and the cub lay right in front of it, wrapped tightly like a newborn, with one small paw sticking out. The wound on that paw had started bleeding again, and on closer inspection it looked like a bite mark, swollen, red, and clearly infected, something that could kill him faster than cold or exhaustion. I grabbed the hydrogen peroxide I normally use for my own cuts, soaked a cloth, and carefully pressed it against the wound. The cub flinched, and that reaction actually made me feel relieved. Pain meant he was still fighting, that his nervous system was working. Outside, I heard a low rumble and looked out the window again. The mother bear had not moved an inch. Her massive body remained still, but her eyes followed every movement, every shadow inside the house. I opened the door slightly and said quietly, "He's still with us. Barely holding on." She did not respond, of course. She did not growl either, only let out a deep breath, as if she understood the meaning of my words. I went back inside, sat on the floor next to the cub, and gave him more honey water. This time, he smacked his tongue more clearly, trying to lick the sweet liquid. It was a small but definite sign of progress. My phone rang. It was Rachel again. "Ginny says you're crazy," she said, "but she's on her way with medication. She should be there in a couple of hours." Thank God. "His paw is bleeding, it looks like a bite, and I think he has a fever," I said quickly. "Keep him warm, don't make any sudden movements, and keep giving him fluids. And for the love of everything, don't open the door wide. That mother bear won't stay calm forever," Rachel warned. I knew she was right. It was already a miracle that the bear had not torn the house apart searching for her cub. For some reason, she trusted me, and that made the situation feel even more frightening. An hour passed, then another. The cub began to move more, trying to turn over, and I whispered softly, "Easy, buddy. It's too soon. Just rest." Then he made a strange sound, not a growl, not a squeak, but something in between, like a broken toy slowly coming back to life. I cleaned his paw carefully once more. The bleeding had slowed. The wound was still red and inflamed, but it no longer looked as immediately dangerous, something I could at least manage for now. Outside, the mother bear finally showed signs of restlessness. She walked a few steps back and forth, as if her body could not decide whether to stay or leave, and then she sat down again in the same place. I lit the wood-burning stove to make the house even warmer. Even though I was already feeling overheated, the cub needed warmth more than I needed fresh air. As evening fell and the shadows shifted, a small miracle happened. The cub opened one eye, just one, and looked directly at me. There was no wildness or fear in that gaze, only awareness, as if he truly saw me and understood who I was. "You're not alone anymore, little one," I whispered, feeling a strange warmth spread inside me, something that had nothing to do with the heater or the stove. He blinked and slipped back into sleep. But for the first time that day, I felt that he might survive. Not a guarantee, not a promise, just a possibility that hadn't existed since morning. When Rachel and Ginny, a wildlife specialist, arrived, the sun was already sinking toward the horizon. The mother bear stepped back into the shadow of the forest but did not leave, continuing to watch the house from a safe distance. "My God, you weren't joking," Rachel breathed when she saw the cub. Ginny immediately got to work, examining him with professional focus. "This is a bite from an adult male," she said after a careful inspection. "Male bears sometimes kill cubs that aren't theirs so the female will go into heat again. This little one is lucky his mother managed to protect him and bring him to you. It's remarkable that she chose a human. She may have been watching you before taking such a desperate step." That thought made me shiver, the idea that a wild animal might have assessed me before trusting me with the most precious thing she had. Ginny and Rachel spent several hours treating the wounds, administering antibiotics, and restoring fluids to the cub's small body. By the time they left, his breathing was steadier, and his paw was professionally bandaged. "We'll leave you the medication and instructions," Ginny said as she packed up her things. "But once he's strong enough, you'll need to return him to the wild. He can't stay with you forever, Aiden." I nodded, even though inside I could already feel an attachment growing to this small creature who had fought for his life right in front of me. Over the next 2 weeks, the cub recovered surprisingly fast. His wounds healed, his appetite returned, and he began to show curiosity about his surroundings, exploring my house with increasing confidence. I named him Baxter, simply because the name felt right, even though I knew I shouldn't name him, shouldn't grow attached to a wild animal that would soon need to return to its natural home. The mother bear continued to come every day, sometimes approaching the house, but more often she kept her distance. Always alert, always watching. I left food out for her, which she sometimes accepted and sometimes ignored, as if she did not want to grow used to human help any more than necessary. One day, when Baxter was already moving confidently around the house, playing and even trying to climb onto the furniture, I received an unexpected visit from Deputy Sheriff Louise Gentry. "Aiden, I've heard rumors that you're housing a bear cub, and that his mother has practically settled on your property," she said without any introduction, standing in the exact spot where the mother bear had stood 2 weeks earlier with her cub in her jaws. I didn't deny the obvious and told her the entire story. She listened with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply said, "You're extremely lucky no one has been hurt. But this is a problem, Aiden. Wildlife Services already knows, and they're planning to come in 3 days to take the cub and possibly relocate the mother. I can delay it a little, but the decision is yours. You need to act." That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I watched Baxter curled up in his nest, looking so domestic, so safe, and so completely wrong for a wild animal. I knew I couldn't keep him forever. I couldn't raise him like a pet. I couldn't take away his chance to become what he was born to be, a free bear in the forests of the Adirondacks. And at the same time, the thought of parting caused almost physical pain, as if a piece of my own heart were being torn away. By morning, I had made my decision. I didn't wait for Wildlife Services to arrive. I didn't wait for the mother bear to decide to take her cub back herself. I carefully placed Baxter into a large container lined with the blankets he was used to. I added his favorite toy, an old tennis ball, and some food for the journey. Then I got into my truck and drove deep into the forest, toward an area where I believed the mother bears might have a den. I drove slowly along the forest roads, watching carefully for signs of bear activity, until I reached a clearing surrounded by dense spruce trees and decided to stop there. I got out of the truck and opened the container. Baxter peeked out, blinking in the bright light, sniffing the familiar forest scents. "This is your real home, little one," I said, feeling a tight knot rise in my throat. I stepped back slightly, giving the cub space to climb out and explore on his own. He took a few uncertain steps, then stopped and looked back at me, as if asking, "What's happening? Why are we here?" At that moment, we both heard a crack of branches. From the edge of the clearing, the mother bear was watching us, alert, but not aggressive. Our eyes met, and in hers I once again saw that strange awareness that had struck me on the very first day. I slowly stepped back, showing that I posed no threat, that I was releasing her cub, returning him to the world where he belonged. Baxter froze, looking between me and his mother, torn between two worlds, between trust and instinct, between human warmth and the call of the wild. The mother bear let out a soft sound, something between a growl and a purr. The cub turned toward her, took a few tentative steps, paused, and then a few more. My heart felt ready to burst as I watched the distance between them shrink, as maternal love reunited two beings that cruelty and circumstance had once separated. Just as they were about to touch noses, Baxter suddenly spun and ran quickly back to me, burying his face in my knees, as if saying goodbye or offering thanks. I'll never know for sure. I knelt down and allowed myself one last stroke of his fur, whispering words he could not understand but might have felt. "Go, live your life, little brave one. You can do this." Then I gently nudged him toward his mother, and this time he did not hesitate. In small jumps, he reached her, and she carefully sniffed him, as if making sure everything was all right, that it truly was her cub, whole and unharmed. Then something I had not expected happened. The mother bear lifted her head and looked directly at me. To my amazement, she tilted it slightly before turning and slowly walking into the forest, leading her cub, who glanced back just once before disappearing forever among the trees. I stayed in the clearing for a long time, feeling a strange mix of bitterness and fulfillment, of loss and rightness. It was as if I had closed the chapter of a book I never planned to write, yet one that had changed me forever. I returned to my empty house, which now felt far too quiet, too spacious, without the little brown whirlwind overturning everything. I gathered the blankets, toys, and bowls, the traces of Baxter's stay, and packed them into a box, which I carried to the attic, knowing I would never need them again, yet unable to part with them completely. Time passed. Several months passed. I returned to my usual life, writing my book, walking through the forest, enjoying the quiet. But sometimes, especially at dusk, I would step onto the porch with a cup of tea and gaze toward the forest edge, knowing that somewhere out there, among the trees, lived a bear cub who once slept on my couch and drank honey from my hand. One crisp morning, I stepped outside and found a small gift on the porch, a handful of ripe forest berries, neatly arranged in a little pile, as if someone had carefully gathered them. There was no one around, but I knew who had left them. I smiled, looking into the forest where a shadow flickered. Perhaps it was just the play of light, or perhaps the mother and cub, who had been a part of my life for a brief time, were letting me know that they remembered, that they were okay, that the boundary between our worlds could sometimes be thinner than we think. Since then, every autumn, as the leaves begin to change color, I find small gifts on my porch, berries, pine cones, and once even a beautiful stone, as if someone is trying to say, we're still here, we remember, we're grateful. It reminds me that the most important encounters in life often happen without warning, and the deepest bonds are formed when we least expect them. Now, as I write my book, I often think of the mother bear who trusted me with the most precious things she had, and of the cub who taught me that loving means knowing how to let go. In a world where the line between wild and domestic seems so clear, they reminded me that compassion knows no species boundaries, and trust can emerge in the most unexpected places, overcoming fear and prejudice. And when visitors ask about the unusual little bear figurine carved from wood on my shelf, I smile and say it's just a souvenir from the Adirondacks. But to me, it's something more, a reminder of the weeks when my home became a refuge for a wild creature, and I became, for a short while, the keeper of another life, before returning it to its rightful owner, the endless forest and the mother who never stopped waiting.